We are exposing a ticking time bomb with Mitch Vexler. He's a whistleblower who alleges home appraisers are inflating property values to jack up taxes.
2018 to 2019, 30% jump. Based on what? Where's the inflation? It was 2.7%. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 years, compound cumulative fraud on the overvaluation of the real estate. Just the face value of the bonds, the fraudulent portion of the face value is somewhere around 5.1 trillion conservatively. People have to go to jail for this.
You're talking something much worse than '08.
08 will literally seem like a walk in Central Park. It'll be a non-existent blip. Contain the damage, i.e. controlled demolition. If you let this go on its own, heaven help all of us.
Wow. Hi, this is Daniela Cambone. Welcome back to the Daniela Cambone Show. Beyond excited because I am bringing you a juggernaut of a show today. Today, we are exposing a ticking time bomb with Mitch Vexler. He's a whistleblower who alleges home appraisers are inflating property values to jack up taxes, fueling trillions in school bond debt that he says will spiral out of control. With homeowners facing tax bills as high as $33,000 or more and an incredibly shaky financial system at risk, we'll uncover how this appraisal fraud could threaten to bring down the entire financial system. Yep, we're gonna find that out today. So please welcome to the show, Mitch Vexler. Mitch, so good to finally meet you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a while in the making, and all the information that we're about to discuss has really been on the go. That we knew there was a problem all the way back to 2016, but even what we've found out really in the last 5 days since last Thursday is just unbelievable how bad and how big this spider web actually is.
Wow. Well, I can't wait to learn about the latest developments because I know you're fighting the fight. You've brought this to the DOJ, right?
DOJ, momentarily, the SEC. Now, there is an SEC attorney that reached out to us several weeks ago, so the SEC is on this, but this is a different division. We will be dealing with the SEC out of Washington. There's a meeting in the works. I believe that'll take place within the next 10 days with the FBI in Houston. So there's several things that are on the go, but we will also more than likely be filing with the Postal Service for mail fraud.
Wow.
Of which every account and every envelope that was sent out with fraudulent overvaluation and fraudulent billing is $2,000 per envelope and 4 years in jail per envelope. So there's an awful lot on the go here, but that's where this is all leading.
So I'm going to try and break this down for everyone watching, right? Because just to give some background, and I'll let you talk about your background, you are an experienced real estate developer, over 30 years of experience, Mitch.
Yes, I've been building for over 35 years, and I have a background in statistical probability and quantitative finance. So I'm a developer and a builder. And so when we're under construction, I'm actually the guy in the field. So not only am I the guy pushing the buttons behind the spreadsheets, but we understand how to build, and we understand that there's thousands of moving items. And it's that thousands of moving items that has helped me figure out as these processes came along. And I also have an accountant that I sit not too far from. So when we realized there was a problem, like I said, it goes all the way back to 2016. But in 2017, we started looking at the certified tax rolls, and then the problem became really evident. And we've been filing lawsuits, unfortunately, every single year since.
Just to give some background, because constitutionally, you found that it is illegal for anyone to be charged a property tax on their real estate. And you say that is why the 16th Amendment says you can tax an income, you cannot tax property. You say we're at the tipping point, that the property values have skyrocketed in the last 5 years. 21.25 trillion of property overvaluation has occurred. It wasn't the market, it was the fraud at the hands of the school districts. So if you don't mind, tell me a little bit about, I mean, I know you alluded to it there, but how you came to uncover this and why hasn't anyone ever realized before that this goes against the Constitution?
From a constitutional perspective, there's so many violations of the U.S. Constitution. The first, fifth, and 14th. Fifth and 14th are with regard to due process. The 16th Amendment is clear. You can only tax an income. You cannot tax an unrealized gain. Well, in the appraisal world, you have what's called market value. That's what they're claiming. Market value is an unrealized gain. So the states have done something completely in violation of the U.S. Constitution, period, end of paragraph. That's just the constitutional issue. And we'll touch on the financial issues and how bad this is. But the reality is that when you realize that market value is an unrealized gain, there is no mechanism in the U.S. Constitution from which they are legally doing anything within the bounds of the law. And of course, it gets worse. So under the Texas Constitution, you have what's called uniform and equal, which means if there's a property that is worth $1 million and there's another property that is worth $1 million, well, if they try to charge the first property, let's say $2 million, by law, they can't do that because under the Texas Constitution, which specifically spells out the issue with uniform and equal, it states it. The property must be valued at the lower value, uniform and equal. Well, they violated the Texas Constitution. Then, under the Texas Property Tax Code, which requires uniform standards of professional appraisal practice, and this is not just for the United States, this is applicable to Canada. So in Canada, they have what's called C, letter C, USPAP, Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. And here we have Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. It's the same document, but under Texas law, it requires that they adhere to Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. Everything we've got on our website, which is a mountain of evidence, proves irrefutably they do not adhere to USPAP. You may as well take that document and light it on fire, which means you may as well take the Texas Constitution and light it on fire. Everything we're going to go through here today is going to be proof that they're not adhering to any constitution, be it the state of Texas, any state's constitution, or any issues in Canada, because nobody's adhering to USPAP. And they've got multiple mechanisms under the hood from which they have gone around USPAP. They have what they call property cards. 2 weeks ago, we found out that on those property cards, they can actually manipulate the effective age of a property. Well, if they lie on the effective age, they can increase the value, and mom and pop or commercial property owners have no clue they're doing this. But we've got the evidence.
Wow. So, okay, I have a few questions, or I know the people at home are going to be saying, wait, Mitch, are you telling me that I'm not supposed to be paying the taxes on my home, the property taxes?
By law, this should never have existed.
So
Never.
then who started this? Who saw this loophole and said, hey, maybe folks won't realize and let's start taxing this? Do you know who led this charge? When did the tides change here? We're going to get right back to the interview, but first, here's an important question to ask yourself. When the next financial crisis hits, how well are you prepared and how diversified are you? My goal is to help educate you and prepare you for what's coming up. I've been covering this market for over 2 decades, and what I'm seeing now is something that is completely unprecedented. We're entering a phase where timely decisions aren't optional, they're essential. So if you want a playbook to make powerful decisions, click below and download our free guide called the Private Wealth Playbook. It's about using gold and silver strategically for the highest levels of protection, privacy, and performance. This is a data-backed guide which will help speed up your understanding and get you right in position quickly. Most importantly, it's set up to position you for long-term wealth and financial security. So if you want to stop second-guessing the economy and take control of your wealth, go to DannyReport.com or click on the link below and download the Private Wealth Playbook right now.
You know, there's an interesting quote by Thomas Paine, and I'm a huge fan. This is 250 years ago. The greatest tyrannies are always perpetrated in the noblest causes, in the name of the noblest causes. Well, that's how this happened. It sounded like a good idea. Well, okay, we'll create a real estate tax and c'est la vie, everybody will pitch in and we'll be able to support the school districts, et cetera, and local municipalities. But mathematically speaking, the school districts are responsible for 83% of all the bonds raised off of these property taxes on average. So when you understand how polluted, poisonous this has become, what started out as let's say it was an honorable thing at that time, an honorable thought, has turned into what is going to be a crisis of confidence. That's where we're headed.
And I want to get into the school boards because it's all part of this master illusion to me now, Mitch, reading your research, where they convince you, oh, okay, you're paying higher property tax, but the schools in that district are phenomenal, and that's why you should be in that district. Is that all part of the brainwashing?
That's all propaganda. It simply isn't true. And here's how I'll prove it real fast. Do you know that bonds are being raised today to pay for bonds that were put in place 10 years ago? The only way to cover the interest on the outstanding principal and the outstanding interest is to raise more bonds. That is the definition of a Ponzi scheme. Over and above that, when you take this one step forward and you say, well, we're doing this for the children. I get offended by this nonsense because do you know that here in the state of Texas, there's an entity, one single entity that feeds over 4 million people a year. So what I have figured out, this is just literally 2 weeks ago, it's on my website, I wrote an article. If you repeal all property tax, you have excess money to cover off the point where those 4 million people won't need to rely on the government for food. So if you say, well, we're doing this for the children, well, really? What about those other 4 million people that are hungry? What about those children of that 4 million group that are hungry? It is pure, utter propaganda.
And just to add some context in my research, for people to understand, school districts issue bonds to fund capital projects like new schools renovations or technology upgrades, repaid apparently through these property taxes. Do you feel so? Are these taxes not being used for this at all, Mitch?
No, they are not. So there's multiple things that are going on. It is true that, okay, we issued a bond and we built a new school, but that's not the reality. That's the propaganda, right? So let's say that a new school, for the sake of conversation, costs $70 million just
Right.
for fun. Well, they will turn around and say, okay, fine, now we need 300 million. Now, let's realize some numbers here, just for the sake of conversation. We just got this number in yesterday. In Salina, Texas, they just approved a $2.3 billion bond with 8,300 citizens. In Godley, Texas, which we've been tracking this number for a while, the outstanding fraudulent school district bond debt is $120,000 today. The average house in Godley, Texas is $160,000. In Argyle, Texas, the outstanding fraudulent school district bond debt is $343,000 with an average value of a house at $450,000. So the problem is 50, 60, 70, 80% of the current market value of a house is now overvalued by virtue of the real estate tax, which is a straight up fraud. There's no math on this planet that can pay this off. And one of the documents that I sent you, coincidentally, dead smack in the middle of that document, it shows that if you look at the employment level in the state of Texas of 15,300,000, give or take, and just for the sake of conversation, let's say, which isn't true, but let's say this, that the cash flow to an average employee is $2,800 per year. Well, 15,300,000 times the 2,800 is going to give you 42 billion, roughly. Okay, that 42 billion, as compared to 660 billion of outstanding fraudulent school district bond debt sanctioned by the state of Texas, means that somewhere between 6.5% and 7.5% is all that artificial $2,800 can cover, meaning it can't be covered. But it is worse because, as I said, the 2,800 isn't even real. So if you look at the outstanding credit card debt across the United States,
Right.
on average, it's $6,700, meaning the net result of this portion of the conversation is that mom and pop are living off of credit cards. Okay, that's a fact. Now, how are you going to generate the money when mom and pop are living off of credit cards on average? How are you going to generate the money to pay for the bonds?
I
That's the
don't
point of
know. That's what I'm shaking my head. Because I know I also saw you mentioned in one of your documents some districts like Poway in California face nearly 1 billion in repayments for just 150 million borrowed. So the question is, who pays the price when these repayments can never ever be met?
Well, that's exactly why we're filing with the SEC and the FBI and the DOJ. Part of this, as I'm calling it controlled demolition, with the idea that I'm hopeful that controlled demolition can actually occur versus the opposite, which is just straight up demolition. We're back to 2007. There's zero doubt about that. There's a movie out that was with Jeremy Irons called Margin Call. And that is exactly what is playing out here, except this is much worse. This touches not just the mortgages or the mortgage-backed securities, and we can get into that in a second with regard to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, but you must realize that the outstanding value of the bonds that they are holding basically are worth 40 cents on the dollar less than face because of this school district bond fraud. But in reality, we're now looking at bonds with a spider web that is much greater than what happened in 2007. So part of the answer to your question, interestingly enough, in the state of Texas, $165 billion comes in to the school districts through the general fund via the federal government. So think this one through for a minute. We have real estate taxes, of which the bonds are raised to the tune of 83% of all bonds between the municipalities and the school districts. Let's call it 83% there. Oh, but that's not enough. Now we have to hold our hand out, we the school districts, for another $165 billion from the federal government. So the school districts have got money coming direct from mom and pop at their local school district level and via the general funds for the state of Texas via the federal government through income taxes. It literally is a scam of biblical proportions. And this is going to end up in a crisis of confidence because Governor Abbott, and it's not a personal thing. I'm not anybody's enemy. I'm actually here to help. But Governor Abbott, there's one simple question that everybody needs to understand and know. Exactly how is the state of Texas going to cover off the outstanding fraudulent school district bonds?
And
He
this is
can't
not
answer the
limited
question.
to Texas, Mitch.
No.
Like, which is this a nationwide, would you say, or are there some states that escape?
There are no states that escape this in one form or another. There are what I would call less criminals and bigger criminals. There's no doubt about that. There are some school districts that have behaved themselves. The vast majority have not, because it turns out that these chief appraisers in these school districts and these school superintendents, in addition to committing accounting fraud and bond fraud, they actually go to seminars to see what the other is doing.
Yeah.
They're literally teaching each other to be criminals.
Well,
So
well,
when you understand the connection, it's really bad.
and well, that kind of answers my next question because I find it fascinating how this spread like wildfire. How all of a sudden they were all sharing this information, saying, "Hey, people are not catching on," and that now it's a plague that's infected the entire nation. I guess my question is, but what's the source? Who is where does the blame or who's the main culprit, would you say, in all of this?
The division of responsibility is an interesting question. So watch this for a second. The school districts claim they need money, so the school district superintendents commit accounting fraud. They lie both to the state, which goes to the state comptroller, and they give a predetermined budget based on their needs, accounting fraud, to the chief appraisers at the school districts. The chief appraisers in the school districts are in fact controlled by and owned by the school district. So the central appraisal districts are controlled and owned by the school district. It's a cacophony of morons that are breaking the law, and they cannot not know that they're breaking the law. They've been told our evidence is out there, it's irrefutable fact, and that also violates federal law. When you know that a law is being broken, it's Chapter 42, Section 1986, and you choose to do nothing about it, and you have the power and authority to do so, in the eyes of the law, they're guilty. So the reason we're asking the SEC now to get involved in the post office is to push these entities, the SEC, the post office, and at some point the Federal Reserve themselves, to come to the plate and figure out what the solution is with the government officials, the local state officials. But they're all in this up to their eyeballs. So this is all starting to surface. Literally, we did a video last night with Travis on Real Estate Mindset, and this video here, these are the two big videos that are breaking what we're about to do. We're hiding nothing from anybody. And we have a spreadsheet that's coming because we were asked to do it for an upcoming meeting at the FBI. Who did it? How it was done? What are the ramifications? So what we created is the who, and then over here in this column are the links to the who. How they did it are the links to the how. The ramifications are the links to the ramifications. So we've lined all this up to help the FBI get control of this quickly. Now, I did file a criminal complaint with the FBI, and so did Jeff Mashburn. As far as I know, there's been about 35 other criminal complaints filed. Well, again, nobody can say they didn't know. But the big kahuna now is the fact that we are going after the FBI, the DOJ, the SEC, and the post office to say, listen, you all have a problem that I can't solve. But as part of what I would call the controlled demolition, repeal the real estate tax in favor of the uniform states sales tax. There literally is no more important issue for any politician in this state of Texas to deal with than that one issue. They signed that bill that I drafted for Helen Kerwin. The state of Texas will start sending the signal across the United States. Game over. This is how we're getting out of the problem for mom and pop. The bigger picture is the bonds, and that's where all the heavyweights have to come to the plate.
You're telling me, Mitch, that no one at the higher level federally or even at the Federal Reserve had any idea of this? Or do you think it's a question of people turning a blind eye here?
I think it's both. There's simply no way that if they were paying attention, I mean, I've been hammering on this for 10 months, but realize I've been working on this hot and heavy since 2017. And we're getting an email every 15 to 20 minutes across the United States around the clock. So the evidence keeps mounting. And as that evidence comes in, it formulates things in my head. Oh yeah, I can answer that. So a lot of that information showed up in that presentation card that I gave you. And even within the last 5 days, what's come through, which was the idea, okay, fine, we're going to have to flip the switch. We're going to have to go to the U.S. Postal Service, and they're going to have to prosecute under mail fraud. People have to go to jail for this. Now, how many people? That's not my job. My job is really just to point out what we've discovered, share it with the world, and say, look, we've got a problem. Last October, when I realized how bad the bond situation was, I thought for sure I was wrong. I mean, I kept looking at my spreadsheet saying, okay, this cannot possibly be. And my stomach was flipping, and I got a cast iron stomach. So I sent my spreadsheet over to a fella in California who's extremely well known in the appraisal world. And I said, would you mind checking this out? So all he did is he sent me back a expletive on his response and said, I'll call you in 5 minutes. I was right. Well, the net result of that back in October was that I proved that the outstanding bonds, by virtue of the fraud, when a school district gets dinged with that label fraud, the bonds economically drop to 13 to 30 cents on the dollar. the pendulum swings so far to the left that the credibility of the state of Texas itself and what has occurred here is actually putting the United States of America in harm's way because somebody's got to pay this off. And just to give you an idea of the size of this, just the face value of the bonds, the fraudulent portion of the face value outstanding across the United States is somewhere around 5.1 trillion conservatively. Everything I've got on my spreadsheets, I took with the attitude of being conservative. Just like I went through that $2,800 money in somebody's pocket, the number's not real. It's obviously negative. But okay, let's be conservative. The point being, even there, the 42 billion is a spit in the ocean as compared to the 606 billion outstanding in the state of Texas. Across the United States of America, it's 5.1 trillion. When you start realizing why are they raising the bonds? Well, they're raising the bonds today, i.e. Salina at 2.3 billion, not to cover off existing bonds, but to cover off the interest. It's compound cumulative. And I want to go back so that your viewers understand something, because you hit on it, and I may have passed over it by mistake. This is compound cumulative fraud. This is compound cumulative assessed value fraud. So assessed values are created by market value. Well, if your market value is $1 million, we're going to say that the assessed value is $1.2 million. That little statement in and of itself proves that they have violated the Texas Constitution, not to mention the U.S. Constitution, and they violated USPAP. And I've got it documented now that the CADs themselves have violated over 60 documents of their own making. So understand what happens. You have let's go back to 2017. From 2017 to 2018, the value jumps, let's say 15%, okay? 15% was never real. How do you know it wasn't real? Because according to US Census.gov and according to the Federal Reserve themselves, the inflation rate at that time was 1.7%. How do you jump 15%? 2017, 2018, 2018 to 2019, 30% jump. Based on what? Where's the inflation? It was 2.7%. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 years, compound cumulative fraud on the overvaluation of the real estate, for which they steal the real estate tax dollars to cover off what in fact has been building for generations, which is the outstanding fraudulent bond. They didn't pay the original bonds off. They rolled them up and they rolled the interest rates out. This is a compound cumulative fraud in multiple directions.
Mitch, when you say, when we talk about the buyer of last resort, it's always been the Fed. Is this something that not even the Fed, let's say your situation plays out, that the Fed can't even step in and save?
I think they have lots of levers, and I don't want to state what lever they should pull because I don't know. What I do know is think of it this way. Let's say that Governor Abbott shows up in the office of Jerome Powell.
Mm-hmm.
The Federal Reserve is going to say, are you crazy? You want us to print money to rescue you? The state of Texas? You did this. Now, the problem is, it's not just the state of Texas, right? This is across the United States. The point being, where's the Federal Reserve going to get the money? The only solution is print it. If they print it, congratulations, we now have the Weimar Republic, and moral hazard has just been approved. What's gone on here at the school districts and the appraisal districts is straight up proof of moral hazard. You cannot rescue this. If you do, you will cause more problems. You can't sanction what has happened here. The state of Texas has sanctioned it, and look at how bad it's gotten. $660 billion. You've got the real estate taxes, like Godly, Texas, the real estate taxes on $120,000 is outstanding per house. $120,000 per house when the average house is $160,000.
It's insane.
That's a second mortgage. Now, let's talk about the third mortgage. Next year, there's going to be a third mortgage. More compound cumulative interest outstanding in Godly, Texas. Godly, Texas is in worse condition than Detroit, Michigan. And I made that point in writing to Helen Kerwin. You may as well take a D9 dozer, start on the north end of Godly, and start pushing. It's beyond repair. And we're working with a attorney out of Washington, extraordinarily smart guy, but he made a really interesting comment. Humpty Dumpty can't be put back together again. That's the point of this. So to your point, can the Federal Reserve rescue this in its entirety? No. As a portion of it, that's up to them to figure out how to do. All I know is you've got to get these real estate taxes off the back of mom and pop, all property owners, and restore their balance sheet. So no person in the United States signed any document anywhere that says, I agree to go bankrupt for the sake of my school district. That's never happened. Well, do you realize that in the state of Texas, you've got 4 million houses in harm's way of bankruptcy and or losing the roof over their head? Across the United States, it's 42 million. That's the equivalent of roughly 37.8% of the household population going bankrupt or losing the roof over their head. You cannot get blood out of a stone. Nobody can. The money to pay these bonds doesn't exist.
If there's no rescue, are we talking then default?
You have a friend, Mr. Justra, and he's 100% right, except it's worse. Mr. Salente is 100% right, except it's worse. As far as I can tell, what needs to occur on the bonds, and this is where the spider web gets really off the chart. The bonds themselves, you say, well, we have a face value of the bonds and the bonds are trackable. Yeah, no, they're not. And here's why. Under federal law, banks are required to hold 60% of their reserves in bonds. So if you think about it, who has the ability, but for the SEC, to walk in under subpoena power and start tracing back the QSIPs? And the QSIPs are the bond numbers of when the bond was issued, how much was issued, et cetera, et cetera. We tried. We even tried under Freedom of Information. Jeff Mashburn tried. It got to the point where even Ken Paxton himself wrote a letter, that's the Attorney General of the state of Texas, wrote a letter to the Itasca School District and said, turn it over. And the Itasca School District told him to stuff it. Well, if you can't find the QSIPs and you can't track it but for the SEC and but for subpoena power, think of how bad this is. What banks are sitting on these outstanding bonds? What underwriters sold these outstanding bonds? When you start tracking the history of the spider web and see how big it's gotten, this is the one reason why I believe at the tail end, not only the SEC and the FBI and the DOJ, they're going to have to go to the Federal Reserve and they're going to have to craft something, somehow, to contain the damage, i.e. controlled demolition. If you let this go on its own, heaven help all of us.
Wow. Mitch, I know we threw a lot at people right now, but if I'm hearing you correctly, you're talking something much worse than 08.
08 will literally seem like a walk in Central Park. It'll be a non-existent blip. This is so much larger. Like these bonds, it's not just the idea of, okay, $1.5 trillion in commercial real estate. That's at least quantifiable. This isn't quantifiable. This is how bad this is. So if you think about it, the interest clock on these outstanding bonds, and by the way, my numbers are conservative. This 5.1 trillion is just what we could quantify. It doesn't even include all the bonds because the state of Texas, through the Bond Review Board, doesn't even track all the bonds. They don't even track what's off balance sheet. You've got 313 agreements, which are energy agreements. None of this stuff is tracked because it's all off balance sheet. The school districts are bankrupt. They're beyond bankrupt, and they're taking mom and pop with them. But coming back to the spider web, it's in the banks. So if you take one bond and they say, okay, fine, we have this bond, we were able to track it through, but the underwriters that sold it, well, they're culpable because they didn't do their due diligence. The people that created it, well, under Postal Service law, mail fraud, they're culpable, they're guilty. So when you start tracing all this and you realize how big this is, that 5.1 trillion, like there's a number out there. I just found out about it yesterday. Even Travis doesn't know about it yet. 17 trillion is what the estimate is based on the spider web. But not all these bonds are even known. They're off balance sheet. And then in the school districts, in the case of Itasca, I did a video on that because it was really fascinating. We found a hidden investment pool. Public doesn't even know it's there. Who paid into the investment pool? What's the tenure? What's the payout? Who's running it? How much in fees are they getting? Not a stitch of this. There's no notes on the balance sheets. There's nothing.
Well, Mitch,
And,
there's
and when they were
obviously
cross-examined by Jeff Mashburn, they literally took all their documents offline.
why?
They're caught. Well, because
Because
they're
they're
caught. They're
hiding?
guilty.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm just thinking, there's obviously many people getting very, 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 very wealthy, as an understatement here, off of this Ponzi scheme, Mitch, right? So I guess my question is, how successful do you think you will be? And I wish you all the success in the world in fighting this, but in bringing this down, because I have a fear that you will have great opposition.
Well, the math is the math. So reasonable minds can agree to disagree, but so far there's not a single person who's ever been able to answer the question, including our own government here in the state of Texas. How exactly are you going to pay for this? They can't answer that question. Well, if you can't answer the question, then the obvious next step is, what's going to happen if? Well, the reason we're doing what we're doing is to try and make this controlled demolition, notify mom and pop. Everything we've got is available for free on the website to mom and pop and to the government, be it state and or federal. It's all there. We're hiding nothing. Every time I learn something, it goes straight to the website. It's all there. So they can oppose all they want, but they can't answer the question.
I want to get back to that point of what we should be doing to take our power back. But just if you could speak to our Canadian audience that watches, because they're probably wondering, does this also apply to Canada? Are you seeing the same fraud in Canada, Mitch? I know you're originally from Canada, and you know as much as you do what's happening in the US. So what are you seeing in the Great White North?
Yes, I am Canadian, eh? So the reality is that Canada, on a per person basis, is in worse shape than the United States. I left Canada in 1990 over this issue because of the socialist policy, and a guy like me didn't fit in. I've done things here in the United States that I could never, ever have done had I stayed in Canada. And I was making good money. But the reality is I didn't have any money because it all went out the door in taxes. So
Right.
I left and have done well here. And I've taken what I've learned, and for some strange reason, all the elements came together back in 2017 and it just started building on its own. In reality, the Canadian system is in worse condition than the United States. And a lot of that, believe it or not, hinges through the Canadian bar system. The attorneys, and this goes to most attorneys, can't add 1 and 1. They're bad in math. So they end up arguing, well, this is the law. But in Canada, if you file a lawsuit, you're looking at a 10-year battle. The exact same math under the hood with regard to the real estate is absolutely clear. The denominator for mom and pop, and the only thing, and I mean the only thing that matters, is the median household income. If that income cannot pay off anything that is required over and above the median household income, that's the definition of bankruptcy. The money isn't there to pay for it. Well, so if mom and pop in Windsor, Ontario, or Quebec, doesn't matter where you are, Carleton Place, Quebec, it doesn't matter. If mom and pop can't pay anything over and above $100,000 or $200,000 for the value of the house in terms of the tax rate at 2%, the answer is you're bankrupt. Well, Canadians are in worse condition because their compound cumulative effect of the fraud that they have created is greater than that of the United States. The United States has the economic engine, at least under the hood, that Canada doesn't have. Over and above that, if you think about it, the majority of the population in Canada is an 800-mile stretch between Windsor and Montreal. You've got a country 1.5 times the size of the United States. There's no math on this planet that can justify this. They're beyond bankrupt. So the question becomes, how is this going to get worked out? Well, the Canadian government, better or worse, mostly worse, always copies the United States. Our Federal Reserve has sent through the IMF and the European Union their method. Well, their method under the hood allowed this fraud at the states and the provinces to be created on the back of mom and pop. It will blow to shreds unless it's done in a controlled manner. It is up to our government to set the pace and get this figured out fast. It is up to our state government to repeal all property tax in favor of the uniform states sales tax. Nobody's saying get rid of the tax. What we're saying is get rid of the fraud. And the way you do it, if I go to the store and I buy a chocolate bar, and that chocolate bar costs me $1, I'm going to pay 15 cents in tax for the next 3 years until this all stabilizes, after which time it'll drop down to 11 or 12%. The delta is simply the fraud. There is a mechanism at the state level to fix the real estate tax. At the federal level, with regard to the bonds, that's a whole different issue. But those bonds are going to make 2007 and 2008 literally look like a picnic in Central Park.
How much time do you think we have before this blows up, before the wheels come off? Are we talking 5 years?
No. So the reality is the system is bankrupt today. So what do you have tomorrow? You've got bankrupt raised to an exponent. That's the reality. It's happening now. What you don't want to do, and this is why the feds have got to get involved, is have a liquidity crisis or a credit crisis. You've got to keep these wheels moving while figuring out how to peel down this debt. Now you can simply say, okay, fine, we can contain it. We can wipe out the 5.1 trillion of bonds via bankruptcy. And those people that invested in that set of bonds, yeah, you could contain it in theory. They're going to lose because they invested in a fraud. Their underwriters are going to lose because they invested in a fraud. Those lawsuits will be filed federally. More than likely, the federal government would have to create a class action, and they would just simply say, fine, it's wiped out. I mean, there's different levers that can be pulled, but that 5.1 trillion on its face, as I said, is extraordinarily conservative because it doesn't include the off-balance sheet financing. It doesn't include the mechanisms of the 313 agreements. And if you think about it, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, it doesn't include the devaluation of those bonds at, let's call it 40 cents less on the face value today. Why? Because those bonds, if Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae accepted a bond in the last 5 years, they're part of the compound cumulative effect of the fraud done at the central appraisal districts. The value on these houses was never real. It's a fraud. We're going to increase the value on the back of mom and pop over and above inflation by 500, 600, 800%. It's a fraud. So it's not just the 5.1 trillion, it's the spider web of who's sitting on it. And then it gets even worse when you understand, well, there's some smart guys up on Wall Street. We have derivatives to hedge ourselves against it. Okay? Good luck collecting on the derivatives.
Well, actually, I have one more question before we wrap. To the people watching who perhaps have not bought their first home yet, Mitch, right? Are they better off renting until there's some resolution?
Absolutely. You'll be able to buy a house. Just have some patience. Travis came across a house in Houston that 7 months ago was at $126 a foot. And I was shocked when he sent it to me. It's now at $92 a foot. And yeah, it's got, there was a tree root that cracked the slab. That's true. But that's an easy fix. You know, it's a $3,000 fix. No big deal. But 126 down to 92, even that got my attention. I mean,
I,
so if people will have patience, they will do okay. You've got to have patience and wait till this gets fixed.
I have so many family in Toronto specifically, which I know you know so much about. We've been waiting for that bubble, and it just keeps growing and growing and growing. I mean, the prices, specifically of homes and property taxes in Toronto, Mitch, are
Well, but there's a correlation. As the bubble is going up, do you realize that the living standards are going down?
Of course.
They're actually correlated. So the point is, do you know that the average condo in Toronto right now that's selling is 480 square feet? Seriously, you want to live in a 480 square foot shoebox for the next 20 years? If you're single, okay, fine, I kind of get it. But as a couple, as a family, no way. And that's the problem. You can't, there's certain times in life where you can't afford free. That's not a living standard. Yet that is the vast majority of condos that are being sold in Toronto right now today. So the market is cratering. What you see in the press, you must take with a grain of salt and say, I have to do my own homework. And to that point, if you look at locally in your local area where your school is, and you can look it up online, how much in outstanding bond debt does my school district have? And you'll get a number. It won't be right, but you'll get a number. And then you take that number and you say, fine, how many houses are in my school district? You divide those two numbers and you now realize how much debt is on top of your house. Well, let's go back to Godley for a second. What's the real value of a house in Godley, Texas, knowing that there's $120,000 in fraudulent outstanding school district bond debt that you, the homeowner, are responsible for? Given your income, what is the real value of that house? The answer is $40,000. Somebody has to pay for this. And that's why I'm saying get it off the back of mom and pop. Restore their balance sheet such that they own the land beneath their feet. You've got to do this because otherwise all the equity in these houses, mom and pop, and the equity in many businesses has been stripped out. If you don't restore it, you will destroy the U.S. economy. Mom and pop are the U.S. economy. 42%, 42 million people are the U.S. economy. That 42 million, they go down, so does the U.S. economy.
Just, I want to bring it home now, and you already touched on, and I'm going to do that as soon as we get off this interview. I want to see what my school district owes Mitch, but empowering people. I mean, what is there anything we can or should be doing?
It depends on one's psychology. So for those who can trade, you can trade this eventually when the market starts cracking, which it may have. I said several weeks ago that Dow was going to hit 24,000, start peeling back, and that seems to have happened. If you can trade around these circumstances. With regard to the bonds, I don't think that the bonds are tradable. Now, the banks are tradable. So yeah, we could, when the market starts cracking on the bonds, yeah, sure, absolutely. You can short the banks. Trading is one way to hedge against this. The bonds themselves, the school district bonds, because the CUSIPs are splattered all over the place, I think is extraordinarily difficult. With that said, if somebody's got cash in the bank, I would ask, okay, if you've got 3 months cash reserves on hand for an emergency, fine. Anything over and above that 3 months, why in the world do you have cash sitting in the bank? Right now today, there's 600 out of the 4,700 banks in the United States that may not exist very shortly. Why would you leave cash in the bank? You are much better off saying, okay, if I don't need the cash, and even if what we're saying here today never comes to fruition, gold historically has kept an 8% pace. It's kept up with inflation plus, okay? If you've got a T-bill at 4.25%, 5% or whatever the Fed takes it to, versus precious metals, what in the world are you thinking? Having money not in precious metals is insanity. If you say, and I used to be a proponent, 5%, 3 to 5% of your portfolio in precious metals. But as we've gone through this, I'm clearly not that proponent. My proponent position now is, if you've got excess cash that you don't need, put it into precious metals.
100%.
Do something to hedge against it. If you want to buy a cash flowing business with no debt, fine. You want to buy a piece of real estate with no debt? Absolutely. But leaving cash in the bank, your cash is disintegrating. And if these things come to fruition, what is the debasement effect that will be created by the Federal Reserve on the dollar? What we have seen so far is not debasement, it's deflation of the US dollar. It's deflation of the purchasing power. It's going down. That's not debasement. If debasement kicks in, why in the world would, I mean, that's the Weimar Republic. You're not hedging yourself. So I don't know that there's any other place to be other than those list of items. You've got to trade and learn. Do not jump out there and just start trading. That's insanity.
Do your
But learn
homework.
about the process. Learn about yourself, because a lot of trading is psychological. And learn about the precious metals if you don't know. And if you do know, don't sit there and do nothing. Apathy is a killer. That's what's happening. When you think about it, these officials in the government have been apathetic to what we've now pointed out is a massive problem. This is going to lead to a crisis in confidence. And if that happens, there is nowhere else to hide.
Uh, I'm so grateful for this interview. Interviews like this, Mitch, make me so proud to be in journalism. And you can renew my faith in this field I love so much. So I'm thankful for you. You are fighting the good fight. You don't need to be doing any of this, by the way, but you've taken it on. And I thank you, truly.
You're right. This is the exact time when journalism needs to stand up and do what it's supposed to do, because at the tail end, this is all about protecting mom and pop. And I want to make that point that the filings that we've made were never about Mavex, my company, or about me. The filings we made are very specific to over 500,000 property accounts in Denton County. This is about mom and pop. The problem is mom and pop have been steamrolled. They have literally, their equity has been stripped straight out of their houses, and they are completely clueless. Because when you look at the laws, there's another set of laws that just came through this morning, and this stuff has been on the books for over 20 years. So I went down the list. Nope, 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 nope. Not one of them has been adhered to. So they can write all the laws they want, but the math supersedes the laws. You can't get blood out of a stone. They have done this to mom and pop. Somehow, the press nationally has got to pick up on this. But what we've learned here between the video last night and this video, this is the guts of the matter. These entities are all going to have to sit down and figure this out in a controlled demolition manner versus the opposite, which is just straight up demolition.
Like I said, I am truly grateful for the work you're doing. I am praying for you, Mitch. Thank you again for bringing this to my attention. Actually, I want to thank my husband who's been singing your praises, and he's been telling me, you got to get this guy on. You know, he's brilliant, and he's been doing this incredible lobbying and to help bring justice to the people. So again, thank you for your time, Mitch. I'm going to have to bring you back. So I'm sure we're going to get so many questions and people will want to follow up. Also, just a side note, I know we covered so much today, everyone. So of course, always reach out to my colleagues at ITM Trading. You can book a free strategy session to go over what Mitch spoke of. And of course, building a strategy surrounding owning physical gold to help protect us exactly in situations and scenarios like this that are unfolding. Mitch, thank you again.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
And thank you all for watching. Remember to subscribe to our channel. It keeps great content like this going, means so much to us. And we will see you soon. Thanks for watching.